Thank you all for joining me for the knowledge sharing series. Today's March 26th of 2020, and I'm going to give a recap of the RDAP conference I attended. A few housekeeping notes. Upon entry, I muted everybody, and I would ask you, if you unmute, if you would mute yourself now if you haven't. And also, I'll be entertaining questions at the very end. So if you'd save your questions to the very end, that would be fine. And I will be sharing my slides under the knowledge sharing series when this is completed. So I attended this Research Data Archive and Preservation Summit in March, earlier this year. This month, from the 11th to the 13th. And it's been a while since I've been to a national meeting, so I wanted to thank Laura for allowing me to go to this conference. There were about 200 people in attendance, and quite a few of them zoomed in, so that was kind of nice. I joined the RDAP Association in September of last year, and earlier this year in January, I gave a presentation on clinical research data. So I'm new to this association, and this was my first conference. When I went to the conference, one of the first things they did when they opened up the meeting was they had a code of conduct. And so since it has been a while that I've attended conferences, I didn't know if this was something common at other conferences, but I thought it was very interesting. They displayed and they actually read through the code of conduct, which I have on the screen here. And they introduced us to a couple of the officers who were the code of conduct officers for the summit, as well as an email if we didn't want to approach somebody specifically, and a method to actually post a complaint. So I thought that was very nice to have that done. The conference over on the left-hand side shows some of the items that I'm going to cover today in my recap. We had a keynote speaker. We had several panel discussions, and that was exciting for me because of the different panels were made up of all the different members within RDAP sharing their experiences. And again, it's been a long time since I've been to a national conference. I thought that was awesome. I will cover some of the lightning talks that they had, as well as a workshop I attended on Friday. We did have poster sessions as well as business meeting within those days, so I won't be talking about those. The other thing that was up on the screens before our guest speaker stood up was a notice to respect the pueblos and the land, and before the meeting started. So it said, these presentations on territorial lands of Tiwa and Tano-speaking Pueblo, Jicarilla, Apache, Ancestral Pueblo, and Humaya peoples, we acknowledge and thank them for their care of this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. Again, I thought that was very respectful and a nice way to start off the meeting, because it was there in Santa Fe. So, and they talked about the protocols of not taking pictures of Native American people unless you ask them, things like that. That was pretty cool. Our guest speaker was Michelle Suina, and she is a PhD from cont'd Pueblo and is a program director for the Good Health and Wellness in Indian Country program at the Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center. And her title was Indigenous Data Sovereignty. So Michelle is a health educator, and she's passionate about making changes to the standard Western approaches of health education and public education so that the tribes realize their own self-defined health goals of Native American tribes. She also, when she came up on stage, she told us that she was preparing to attend the Pueblo Comic Con. And I think some of you might know what a comic convention is. And so they hold one for the Pueblo as well, specifically. And so she was dressed as a superhero. And so she hasn't shared her slides, so I didn't have a picture of her in her superhero outfit. But it was pretty amazing to hear what her story was. And so she showed us that her cape was made up of a scarf that had her family colors and their design. And then she went through and told us about what her tool belt was and her symbols. And for example, her beaded pin represented a reminder that metadata tells a story. And then she had a flashlight, and she told us that it's to shine a light on data practices and so forth. So she went through her whole tool belt and told us how she protects the indigenous data sovereignty data. And so that was pretty cool. So Michelle's message was about reclaiming their own narrative. The indigenous data sovereignty emphasizes the development and mechanisms that support the indigenous control and governance of indigenous data using fair and care principles. Some of you might be familiar with what the FAIR principles are for data management. And so that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. They have combined it with their principles of care, collective benefit, authority of control, responsibility, and ethics. And so there was 573 recognized tribes in the US that have gotten together to help establish how they want to present their information and their data and how to protect it. And so I have a couple of links there on the slides for more details. The one thing I didn't know about was biocultural labels. I thought that was pretty cool, how they have put together a mechanism so they can distinguish what they claim to be traditional knowledge versus biocultural knowledge and labels that they identify with some of the publications and the items for their materials. And so they are working on trying to get the information in the institutional catalogs and classification standards and the metadata all changed to be more aware of the labeling that's appropriate within the community. And again, I do have a link at the bottom here for more information. So she was our guest speaker. She was wonderful, and she gave us a lot of information. So that was a very nice way to open up the conference in Santa Fe. Next, I want to tell you about the panels. The first panel was on partnerships. And so we had 3 people who were up on the stage for panel 1. And so on the first panel, we had somebody talking about connecting people and data via collaborative data repository. And so is what they were trying to do there is a University of California, Davis, along with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, were trying to preserve some of the GIS data, and they talked about some of the challenges, especially the terminology and the metadata use. So they had to work through a lot of those barriers to find out a common language before they could start setting up the repository for long-term storage. The next talk was about the Digital Object Lifecycle Project, or DOLCE, connecting libraries and advanced computing. So here, it was between the University of Texas, Austin, and the Texas Advanced Computing Center. And they were trying to coordinate the referrals that come into the Texas Computing Center, as well as what came into the library, and create a single access point, because they found that they were referring their clients back and forth. And so they set up a web space for that for their data services. And that was pretty neat. They showed us what that looked like. The next one is an interdisciplinary approach to research data and computation, stories from 3 institutions. The institutions were University of Berkeley, California, University of Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, and Arizona State University. And they had a library that used to be like ours, where their IT was integrated. And so these 3 different universities got together, well, the librarians from these 3 universities got together and decided they wanted to come up with a way to establish services for their research community. And because, like at our university, we don't really have a secure web-based storage for our researchers. So they came up with a plan, and each one of the 3 universities got up and spoke about how they implemented their plans. Next was a panel 2 discussions on data visualization. And just overall, I thought they were really going to talk more about what they visualize, how they visualize the data and what have you. But it was more about how they put on these data training sessions. Like Alex in Xavier University of Louisiana, he was trying to put together his lab, where he created what's called a data software or data carpentries class. And let me stop and tell you about what that is. It's not with wood, it's not an actual carpentries class, but it is a method of teaching that allows students to learn the skills of using open source software for their trade, okay? Because there's software carpentries, there's, I'm using different software available, and there is data, so how to manipulate and clean data, and there's also a libraries carpentries. And so they're all open source, and after we're done, I can share where to find all of these, or you can just Google. And so Alex talked about how he set his up to work with non-scientists, and some of the challenges that he came across, which I think everybody does, is trying to find time for the students to actually attend his little training sessions, and whether or not to make them non-credit versus credit courses, maybe to get more participation. And one of the other things that he found was that people wanted specific examples guided towards their disciplines. And so that was good notes for me, because I want to set up something for our library that's going to kind of model the carpentry's sessions, but to our patrons. Okay, the next talk, Connecting Communities Through a Passion for Data Visualization in Libraries, the Visualizing of the Future Symposia. Make sure that somebody's not trying to reach me. Okay, sorry. This one, let's see. Let me see. This was from University of Louisiana. And they wanted to teach people how to understand how to code, use the data, and how to visualize it. And so that's what their course, again, that was a typical type of data carpentry type of class. And for their future direction, they're going to use comics to illustrate how to do data visualization, because they both employ empathy. So I thought that was very interesting. Then we had a series of lightning talks where people gave like a 5-minute update on what they were doing. And so there is an open data toolkit for the diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. That was out of University of Michigan. And so it was a subgroup of the ACRL that came together and created the code of conduct, similar to what I showed at the very beginning of this presentation. And so they're working on an equity, diversity, and inclusion toolkit that will be available for all universities who are part of the ACRL. The next talk was about digging into data, quantifying curation quality at 2 different institutions, and that was Cincinnati and Colorado State. And so they looked at all of the data that was within their repositories, did a data rubric to see how is the discoverability, accessibility, and transferability actionable for all of the items that they have in their repositories. So they went through the process of what they found. The next talk was building institutional and individual capacity around ethical management of research data at the University of Calgary. And so Calgary has 3 major federal funders, and each one of them have different research data management policies. And so the project started off by creating a tri-agency policy. So they were all unified as to what people needed to know about and how they needed to work with their data. And so they built some basic research data management trainings for everybody on finding, cleaning, analyzing, and visualizing the data. So that was a pretty big accomplishment for them. So that was cool to see and hear about. Then we had Doreen she was from the University of Utah. And her talk was, who pays for electronic lab notebooks on campus? And the electronic lab notebooks she talked about was called Lab Archives. Well, she had gotten a grant 5 years ago with, well, she didn't say who she got it from. It might have been an IMLS grant to help consolidate for their health sciences center all the labs, electronic lab notebooks. And so she's getting ready to retire this year, and she needs to either renew the contract or come up with some sustainable method to combine the Office of Research, the libraries, and possibly their high performance computing center. and that she just kind of told us what a disaster that was involved with. And a note for everybody to try and set up something sustainable before you get started on a project. Excuse me. Continuing on, there was talk on how can we do better digital information organizations and approaches to equity, diversity, and inclusion work. There was about 10 different universities who came together, and instead of doing a code of conduct, they created a community agreement. They haven't shared their slides yet, so I don't have the link to where they're at and what they have available so far. The next talk was about communication toolkit for sharing data, facilitation for conflict-free sharing experience. Okay, and so that one was from Oregon State University, and they worked with everybody on campus to create templates for data sharing, what type of roles each person has when you're doing a research project and what their responsibilities are for data sharing, how to use your data and data use agreements, and a workflow that could be shared. So that was their experience they had at their university. The next talk was collections as are data sets, connecting research data management to digital collections. Okay, that was from Montana State University. And they used machine learning to create her data set that she worked on. And she talked about things that were important to her. Like she thinks that data sets should expire because when people collect data and information, it might be relevant now. And the example she gave was like some of the old Disney movies, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, things like that, where it's not appropriate these days. And so that was her idea that data sets encompass the worldview of their creators and they should expire them, keep them preserved, but still, you know, be respectful and manage your collection and only have items available that need to be. Okay, carrying on to panel 3 consortia, we had 4 different universities represented here. We had Harvard University. Oh, my thing says the meeting's going to end in 10 minutes. Sorry about that. Okay, we had Harvard, Cornell, UNM, and the Great Plains. Okay, so all of these were updates on consortiums or kind of in consortiums. All of these institutions set up something along the data carpentries guidelines and the free courses they offer, and they just modified them to meet their needs. They all talked about what were some of the pros and cons. When you set up to join and train and teach data carpentry classes, you have to make a commitment to spending training trainers and actually putting on the workshops. And so they talked about each one of these. Okay, I'm going to move on. Panel 4 was about data connections. We're all in this together, building a network of data support professionals in the classroom. Okay, so Stephen from the Sweden National Data Center, they were transitioning from a national preserve service, and they wanted to work with their local libraries to create a long-term preservation and access of that material. So he went through and showed what they were doing in Sweden. The data disconnect, how changing industry data sharing policies impact business research and pedagogy. So here again, it was how working with business education schools on research data management skills, getting in there and doing training sessions to the business schools and using data sets that would be relevant to their needs. The last one here is making campus connections through endangered data week events and highlight ethical issues in research with vulnerable populations. Wanda, she is from University of Michigan, and she created a LibGuide that has a ton of stuff on it. So, Colleen, I thought about you, and I thought, oh, this would be a great resource for us to take a look at. And so she talked about how transgender information needs to be protected and shared in a responsible way. And she also mentioned that transgender was finally added to PubMed in January of this year. Okay, the last panel was on data privacy. And of the talks that we had going there, I will, in sake of time, I'll just kind of go through it. The first one is talking about how you spend time up front with the IRBs trying to make sure the privacy of all your data is accounted for and you're taking care of all of the responsible ways to handle data. But what about in the end when you're actually preserving and curating that? They talked about direct and indirect or quasi-identifiers. A quasi-identifier is when you combine things like gender, date of birth, and postal code. How you can identify people with just those three items. And so that was their focus, is making sure that people are aware of when you preserve something, you have to really take care of it. Connecting students to their data. This was interesting because the talk here was about how libraries are collecting data from students, but the students aren't informed. Now, learning analytics is a matter of where you click on things, how many mouse clicks it takes to find something, how you navigate on a page, what are you searching for? And so libraries, and Robin probably knows all about this, they collect that. And so her take on this was, do the students know about it? And is it secure and maintained properly? The last one was policy as practice, the whys and hows of library policy contents. So here they went through and did a scrape of all the libraries who are part of the ARL and wanted to find out what is the gaps in their different policies. And they wanted to make sure they were all in plain language. So when a student reads them, they're identifiable and in a language that everybody can understand. Okay. The last talk was on Cyberinfrastructure Vision for the 21st Century, Discovery by Amber Budden. And it was in a National Science Foundation grant that they are now trying to transition all of that information into a community-driven program. So Data One is leading the effort for all of the databases they have access to. They want to set up a system where they do a subscription-based service. So people will buy a subscription from Data One and have access to all of the environmental data that they've collected over the years. Some of the things with their study they found was that 25% of the publications examined were available in the repository, But of that 25%, only 37% were in data one. And so that's kind of sad. You know, people still have issues about sharing their data. And so I have a link there. My time is almost up. I think I have 3 minutes left. So on Friday was the workshops, moving the ESIP Data Management Training Clearinghouse to Training and Education Gateway for research data skills instructors. And so that workshop was learning about what the clearinghouse database was and how to extract data out of it and how to convert it to something that will be sustainable, because the platform they have it in now is at end of life. And so they were asking our input in the workshop. How do you find information? What's a good way to search this database to make it available and accessible to others? The last workshop, it was a standard type of workshop on supporting open science data curation, preservation, and access by libraries. And so they gave us a demonstration of what open science was and what they're trying to do. Okay, so I have a minute left. I just wanted to say thank you all for attending. If you want to send me any questions you have, I'll be posting these slides along with all my references for all the different people who spoke at these slides, so you can find out specific institutional information and links. All right. Thank you all for attending today, and I'll chat with you soon at our all hands meeting.